Good evening, everyone. Here we are with Candace Raub, a very long time friend, wonderful author, lover medieval mysteries, actually love York. And in fact, Candace has spent time in York, partly driven by the fact that I've read all your books and recognize the landmarks. So what we have here is the River Woman's Dragon. And we'll talk about the dragon, which is a literal and figurative sort of character in the book. And just for those of you who don't know Candace, she has, up until COVID, divided her time between Seattle and York. And we'll talk about why she likes York as compared to any other city in England. And she has written 12 previous Owen Archer books, 3 Kate Clifford medieval mysteries, and the Margaret Carr trilogy. So I'm glad you've gone back to Owen because he's still one of my favorite characters. And since I have to admit that I overdosed on Catherine by Swynford, Anya Swynford, I am like totally steeped in the politics of Edward III, the Black Prince, John of Gaunt, what happened afterward that led to the War of the Roses. And so the Owen Archer books actually take place in 1375 when Edward III is still alive, but clearly fading. And the Black Prince has what, a year to live, Candace, I think it is?
Actually, in this book, he's already dead, isn't
Is
he?
he?
No, he
No,
isn't.
he can't
Never
be.
mind.
He died
I'm
in
writing the
13.
book where he's already dead. Never mind.
Yeah, right. He died in 1376. Then, in fact, if you ever go to Canterbury Cathedral, there's you can see various artifacts of the Black Prince hanging up in the cathedral. But the politics of this time, as with all dynastic controversies and all the rest of it, are difficult. So the Archbishop of York has been part of all that, but he has passed on. And now we have a new Archbishop. So lots to talk about. Candace, why is it that you picked on York as compared to any other city in England?
You've been there. Can't you just, I mean, I could have done, I thought about doing Winchester, but I love York. And it just, the moment that I arrived in York, I felt as if I were coming home. There's a tremendous pull that the city has on me. And of course, now I have so many friends there and it has such a great history for that period because you have the second most powerful churchman in England, the Archbishop of York. You have a very wealthy merchant class. You have the mystery plays, although they're stronger later. You have a lot of power struggles. You have a lot of a reason for a lot of important people to come to the city, and a river that brings ships in. I mean, it's just, there's a lot to play with. And then there's the surrounding, very atmospheric Yorkshire to play around with, which I haven't taken Owen back out into Yorkshire.
No, I know. Was this before it was all divided up into writings and so forth?
No, it was writings then. Yeah. So, but I took him out more into Yorkshire in the earlier books, and I kind of need to do that again.
Yeah, well, the countryside is wonderful. The River Ouse, of course, is an historic river. One of the things I love about York is that it has a very significant Roman history, and it also has a Viking history.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether the Viking village, because I haven't been there for some time, but I still remember touring. What happened was that somebody was doing the gasworks, and they were spading up part of York, and they ran across the ruins of a Viking settlement. And they decided to make it like a Disney tour attraction where you had to get in a little car on rails and you went around the Viking settlement. And they went so far as to leave in all the original smells. Well, not leave them in, but recreate them. So when you went past the midden, you gagged. Is it still there?
It's still, and after the flood, now it's been about maybe 5 years ago, they completely redid it. And it's better than ever. It is so amazing. And they have some people speaking in the language of the time.
Wow.
As you ride past, and it's great. It's better than ever.
I'm so glad to hear that. So anyway, you have all these layers of history. You have, pre-Roman, and then you've got Roman, and then you've got Viking, and then of course Candace is writing about the medieval city. Quite a lot of it remains, which is unusual, but the walls are still there. Of course, York Minster, which is absolutely glorious, and which did survive a fire. When was the rose window shattered in the fire, Candace? Do you remember?
Oh God, now I forget when which fires happened when, but one of them happened in the 90s.
Yeah,
The fires was in the 90s.
I think I'm trying to remember when I was there. I was there last in the 90s, and I think they were working on restoring the window. Anyway, the medieval glass is fragile, but it's wonderful when they can repair it. And York Minster is just a glorious example of the Gothic. But it's important in Candace's books because of the Archbishop, and he's, as you say, he's a real senior. He's a real prince of the church, isn't he?
Yes, he is, because he is second only to the Archbishop of Canterbury in importance, and he has the ear of the king. And so he is quite powerful. He has control over a large, I mean, the north of England, as far as the church goes. And at that time, archbishops were a lot more powerful with the lay people than they are now. I mean, as far as the nobles, listening to them, and so what has happened recently in the series is that with Thorsby dying, the Nevilles have put an archbishop on the throne of York, and a pretty unsavory character, but the Nevilles are rising to power, and they now have this very powerful churchman in the family.
Wow, it's just like the Borgias and the Pope, if you really think about it. It's a wonderful parallel. I mean, we must remember that England was Catholic. This is Roman Catholic in 1375, and so he's a prince of the Catholic Church as an archbishop, but he's also got a lot of political power, as Candace said. And I really miss Thorsby. Unfortunately, I guess he had to die, didn't he? Didn't you? Were you tempted to keep him alive?
I was very tempted. And then I thought, I can't do this. I mean, this is not history. And I'd already, placed an incident in his time that hadn't actually happened. And I'd extended his reign as Lord Chancellor of England a little longer than it actually was, because I wanted to play with that at the beginning of the series. So I thought, I've cheated with him enough. It's time for him to die. And now I have this loathsome archbishop in his place, and which it will be fun to play with him.
I'm sure. Well, it must be tempting to think about killing him off, but I guess if you're going to be, true to history, I mean, that's the thing about writing historical fiction. You have to make decisions about how much you're going to stick to the real thing and how much of it you're going to take liberties with for your stories. But things are only going to get worse politically in England for the next long time. Let me think. Henry IV comes to power in 1400, I think.
1400, yeah.
So we're 25 years away from that. We have Edward III, who's dying, or was at least suffering from senility. The Black Prince was going to die the next year in this particular book. And the Black Prince leaves one child, Richard II, and he's going to reign in a very chancy reign up until, was it 1399, when he's forced off the throne. And then we get the Lancastrians, and then, we're off into the War of the Roses. So it's wonderful. If you can find a copy of Catherine Vyse Wynford, you can hardly get a better background.
I read that when I was in high school.
No kidding. I mean, it's such an amazing, amazing book. And what happens is so unlikely in the way that the entire family into the future really plays out. But anyway, we're before that. So let's talk about Magda. You dedicated this book to a dear friend who has died, but was a great part of your writing.
Yes. Joyce Gibb was, she was my ear, my eyes. When I was working on a book, I would send her snippets, and she would just kind of, she knew the characters so well. And she had this amazing ability to just see the motion, the whole motion. She called it, I see the motion picture. And so she would catch things like somebody walked into a room and then I never used them. But there's, things like small things like that. But also we would argue about, would this character ever do this? And she had a great knowledge of horses. So I picked her brains a lot about the horsemanship and taking care of horses. And her daughter is a dog expert, so I've used her for the dogs. And it's I miss her terribly. I mean, she was fading over several years. And
Well, that's pretty hard to lose somebody that is important to you and also important to your writing. But she wanted you to write a story more centered around Magda, who is one of those wonderful women who, was trained in the herbal lore and the herbal arts, and therefore scared the men to death. But she was really important, especially to women, because childbirth was a totally chancy thing back in those days. And eventually we wound up with witch trials in the 17th century. But people like Magda were both loved and feared, right?
Right. And part of it is that people didn't understand how she had all the knowledge that she had, and that was the case with women healers. I mean, and they've handed information down from mother to daughter and through the generations. And I'm sure that they didn't always share everything that they knew with their clients. And the church was as I said in my author's note, the church was beginning to be concerned about this, when actually it was the men in the monasteries and the learned men with the books who were playing with a lot of dangerous stuff. But it was the women who were the very easy target.
Well, they were, and very often it was handed down from mother to daughter. I'm not sure. I mean, were they generally literate, or were many of them illiterate?
I would guess that many of the healers, at least at this time and earlier, were illiterate, or they certainly didn't have access to books about healing,
Right.
and herbals, and this was all practical knowledge that they had.
Sure. Well, they were trained, out in the woods and out in the fields, to recognize plants and to figure out what plants could and could not do. There's a moment in the book where Magda's daughter, with whom she has a very uneasy relationship, has clearly overdosed herself on something, with eventually very sad consequences. I thought that, yeah, right. And for any of you who ever watched Poldark, for example, especially the earlier version of Poldark, when Elizabeth has to convince her husband that her first child was full term, when in fact wasn't. I'm not going to give away too much, but anyway, she attempts to convince him that her second child is, and she overdoses on something which kills her. And so, there was no pharmacist there to say, wait, the dose is, whatever it all is. So, I mean, we're talking not just benign sorts of plants and all, but plants that they could heal, but a lot of them could kill or have disastrous consequences. So,
Yeah.
People feared Magda, as I said, as well as probably women valued her a lot more, certainly in this
I
book.
would think so. Yes, I would think that the women appreciated how they depended on her, and how at ease they felt when she was present at a birth. Because I think that a good healer, I've thought a lot about what makes a good healer. And some of it is just the presence, their presence, and how much you trust them.
Sure, inspiring confidence would be a great part of it. And, maybe they just had better basic hygiene. I mean, so many women who died of childbed fever all the way through the Victorian era, it was just because people didn't wash their hands. I mean, they would go, a doctor or midwife could go from birth to birth without ever bothering to wash up and transfer germs. I mean, nobody understood germs back in 1375.
No, no.
So, Magda, because well, tell us about where she lives, because I think it's fascinating. Where has she chosen to live in the city of York?
Well, she lives right outside the city gates of York, and she lives on the river, on a rock in the river that I have had fans go out and try to find, and of course it's not there. That is fictional, but at the time, the river was a tidal river.
Right.
And so her island would be completely surrounded by water at times. And it would actually have a little causeway, a little rocky causeway for people to walk out to her rock at other times. And her house is fashioned from wood, and the roof is an upside down part of a Viking ship with the dragon that has more of a role to play in this story than it has up to this
point.
It
really does, right? I mean, in a way, it's sort of like Mont Saint Michel, except mini, but at various points, the river house is like a moat, and there she is out there on her island, and it takes a boat and fighting the tide to get to her. But then at other points, when the tide is down, there's a sort of stone causeway that you can walk across. So tell us about the dragon. I mean, I love the title, The River Woman's Dragon. It's so wonderful. But, what is the dragon?
Oh, well, that's for you to discover.
Okay.
One of the things that I think people find very appealing about Magda is that she's an enigma. That she's a mystery. I mean, what exactly is she? Who exactly is she? And so I give lots of hints in this book, but I don't actually want to explain to you, who this is. But you do see that somehow she and the dragon are one at times, that she is the dragon and the dragon is Magda. But, they're also separate, because the dragon just sits up there. It's made of wood. It just sits up there on top of but there is something magical about this dragon, because it's warm, and there are incidents in the book in which you start wondering, I hope the reader starts wondering, well, just exactly what is this dragon, as you asked. So it worked for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think it is a wonderful title. And the dragon, as I said earlier, is both literal and metaphorical.
And I think this is an example of how the medieval mind worked.
Yeah.
Which is what I wanted, that we like to explain everything. And I just don't think that our ancestors necessarily expected to explain everything.
No, actually, if you ever go to an evensong service in the UK, there's a wonderful line about, save us. I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've heard it. But anyway, evensong was, when the dark came down, and the idea was that you needed to be protected from the terrors of the night and so forth. And so the dragon is a protective kind of a spirit for Magda. I did like the way that you bring more of her past history into the book, her relationship with Sven, the children that she has. And she has a terrible relationship. Well, not her fault really, but her daughter is a real work, she's a piece of work. Why did you decide to make, is it Asa or Asa?
Asa.
Why did you decide, to create Asa as such a combative and controversial character.
Well, she was in The King's Bishop when Magda goes up onto the moors and Owen goes up chasing one of his friends. So I created Asa early in the series.
Right.
And she was very much in contention with her mother at the time, and they pretty much didn't speak. And so when I decided that I was bringing her back to sort of give you different aspects of Magda in this book, I couldn't make her suddenly this
No,
really
she had to
wise
be the
person.
same, right? I get it.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed. I think one of the wonderful things about working on Magda during the pandemic was that our emotions were so on the surface at all times. It was so, there was so much going on, and with the election and everything, and to be in Magda's mind and how she really doesn't judge. She, this is how a person is, and this is how I deal with them. And she's unflappable, even with her daughter. I mean, she is concerned about her daughter, but she isn't going to get in a lot of tugs of war with her daughter. And I think Asa hates that about her. I think that she just wants Magda to lose it over her, and she just does.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, I thought that, to a great degree, what drives Asa in this book is resentment that she doesn't have her mother's inherent healing powers and so forth. She has an ability to sketch that comes into play during the book, but she feels as though somehow she's been cheated, that she didn't just inherit whatever this gift is that Magda has. This also might be infuriating to her that Magda refers to herself in the third person all the time. I mean, it takes a little while when you're reading this to understand that, when Magda is talking to Magda, that's what she does. She refers to herself. It isn't somebody else talking. So I did think that you did a wonderful job bringing Magda's past history, all of which is, not all of which is wonderful, but she's a survivor. And now she's, I mean, for her time, she's old.
She is.
Yeah.
She is. My agent has figured out that I didn't even figure out how old she is in the book, but my agent has figured out that she's in her late 70s.
Which is remarkable because 50 was old.
Yes.
And I mean, women were subjected to, so many potential health disasters. Pregnancy was really tough. And I don't know, but some of them, if they managed to get through their childbearing years and so forth, did live to be extraordinary ages. So she's probably one of those people that, Anne Perry created Aunt Vespasia in her 80s, very early on in her long-running Charlotte and Thomas Pitt series, and Aunt Vespasia really never got any older than her she even got married towards the end. Everybody else aged along, but not Aunt Vespasia.
Well, maybe Magda should get married again. Yeah,
she does. So, so I mean, in a way, Magda can be, timeless. But how does she relate to Owen Archer? Because I mean, while this book features, Magda is a focal point here, but Owen and his wife Lucy are the long-term characters in this series. So where have Owen and Lucy been, and what's going on with them?
Well, Owen and Lucy have been down in Westminster, well, not Westminster, past London with the prince, with the Black Prince. They were summoned down there to consult with him. And so they are on their way back to York at the beginning of the book. And the death that happens at the beginning of the book happens before they're back.
Right.
And Magda is the one who discovers the body, which is not great for her because she was the last person known to have been with this person. And so what I wanted was to show how Owen is going to solve this mystery and try to protect Magda, and how Magda is much more, she is staying outside the city. She is concerned with the people who are beset with pestilence, and the people who need her outside the city, the poor, who are really her mission, her ministry. And her point of view, so I switch back and forth between Owen being the captain of the city and being the person responsible for bringing order to the city and finding out who committed this murder, and all of his activity around that and his investigation, and Magda's very different frame of mind and her pretty much lack of concern about whether she is safe, because she has a mission. I mean, she is a healer. That's when she speaks of herself in the third person, it's because she is, it has nothing to do with her as a person. You know, she doesn't take the glory of somebody being healed. She has given herself to the people that she's taking care of. So there are very different points of view in the book. But Owen sees her as she has become one of his teachers. And she's very close with Lucy, the apothecary in the city, his wife. And so, you know, their relationship has built up over the years so that they're very close. And he is determined to prove her innocence because he knows that she wouldn't murder someone.
We haven't mentioned that unnervingly, the story that Candace has written is when the Black Death is resurgent. So we're in a pandemic, or at least the rise again. The real terrible crisis of the Black Death in England was in 1349, basically. But it never went away. It would keep coming back. It came back in the 17th century. I mean, they had the plague in London under was it Charles II, I think. Anyway, it was one of those things that not eradicated. Last night, I did a really interesting conversation, Candace, with Nancy Goldstone about Maria Theresa and her three daughters. And one of the things that you really have to notice when you look at the families was how everybody died of smallpox. I mean, it was just gas. So the smallpox kind of took over. You didn't really see much of the Black Death in the 18th century as compared to smallpox, which had become so virulent. And, you know, living now in a time of COVID, it reminds us that, you know, we've never been safe from pandemics. Never. And so Magda is, Owen and Lucy have had to leave their children, or chose to leave their children out in the country away from the city. Because, you know, nobody really understood transmission, but they kind of got the idea that if you're all crowded together somewhere, more people would get sick than if you weren't. And so Magda is facing up not only to this murder, but she really wants to help people who are stricken with the plague, right?
Yes. And the reason that she's staying out of the city is because in a time like this, when people fear, I mean, it was a very frightening time, and you know, we can now more readily understand what a frightening time that can be. And the churchmen were saying that, you know, it could be because of their sins that this was being brought upon them. And so Magda is a pagan. She does not consider herself a Christian. She does not go to church. She kind of thinks rather with some disdain about a lot of what the church stands for. And she just doesn't have any time for it. So of course the churchmen, you know, some of them feel that she is dangerous, that people who come to her for aid are in danger of, their souls are in danger. So she realizes that there's this new person and this new man in the city, a physician, who is causing a lot of talk about Magda and how dangerous she is. And so she is just staying out of the city. I mean, just, that's fine. I'm staying out of the city. The people have someone to help them. The richer people are in the city. The poor people are out here. I'm going to take care of them.
Yeah, and of course this guy who's, you know, arrived and touting himself as a physician and all, doesn't want any competition.
No.
Right, and you know, and much of the church was misogynistic in the first place, so you know, wasn't a great time for Magda, and there was only so much she could actually do for people stricken with the plague. I mean, there was no universal cure available, even for somebody like Magda, and you know, it was a really tough time. It must have been weird for you to be writing about this at a time when we are all, and you know, think about what we're going through today. I mean, we have adults having tantrums like kids, you know. I mean, they had a list the other day of all the stuff that's gone on at the Phoenix airport, people urinating in public because they're protesting masks. I mean, what's that?
Oh,
You
I
know,
didn't know that.
it's like, come on, you know, people want somebody to blame. They want, you know, they're it's irrational, you know, because fear makes people irrational, but also makes people behave really badly and be less interested in the common good than it is in individual survival or the survival of their family. So it makes people really selfish. And so Magda is an interesting contrast to that because she is so unselfish.
Yes. And she, but it was, you know, I had promised Joyce that this was the book I was going to work on now. And she got to read a little bit of the beginning of the book before she died. And then in January or February, when, this plague of our own is becoming rather evident. And here in Washington, we were sort of the first people at the time. We thought we were the first people to get it here in the United States. I thought, well, maybe I could just skip over the fact that the pestilence was back in England at the time I'm setting this book. But it was so important in the plot and so important to show what Magda had to deal with. I mean, how she really was on the edge of society, that I decided, okay, I'm just going to do it. It may be painful to write about it. But every time I wrote about something, people's reactions and thought, oh, this is a bit over the top, I thought, no, read the news. It is not over the top at all.
Just read the paper every day and lo and behold, we all were.
I feel that
and you know, pandemics may become a way of life because there are too many people living in too many crowded situations. This is the third one to arise in the last couple of decades from China. We had SARS and then we had MERS, or the other way around. Now we have COVID, and you know, it may just be that we're going to see it. But I mean, it was 100 years ago that the Spanish flu, as it was then called, attacked everybody. There's terrible virulent influenza that wiped out families, wiped out whole villages. Dana Stabenow wrote a really moving book about a whole Alaskan village that was completely wiped out by the influenza. You know, so it's been a fact of malaria, other kinds of things. It's been a fact of human life forever, just because. But you're right, the fact that we're in one makes your book more understandable, more believable.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, I think it does. So tell us about Owen, for people who've not read the book. Why is he called Owen Archer, and what is it that has brought him to what's really a very prominent job?
Yes, he was captain of archers for the Duke of Lancaster, the previous Duke of Lancaster. And at that time, he would have just been known as Owen, or Owen the Welshman. But at some point, he just takes on people's last names were often their occupation or where they lived, and he just takes on the name of Archer. He is wounded in battle, actually not in battle, but in the camp by some hostages, and loses the sight in his left eye. And if people who have tried wielding a longbow will know that you stand sidewise to hold it, and it takes a great deal of strength. And so you are sighting with your left eye. And he just felt, I can no longer be trusted. I can no longer lead the men. And he became a spy for Henry of Grosmont, who was the Duke of Lancaster at the time, learning to read and write and carry himself as a minor noble so that he could be his eyes and ears. And when Grosmont dies, he recommends him to John Thoresby, the Archbishop of York. And so in the first book, The Apothecary Rose, Owen comes to York very reluctantly to investigate the death of the Archbishop's ward, and gets into, a much thornier mystery than was expected. Well, it gives it away, but it doesn't give it away, because most people know that he eventually marries the apothecary, Lucy Wilton, and by the second book they're married. But now he has roots in York, someone he loves dearly, and he's not going to leave. And also Thoresby has him under his control, and he wants him investigating things for him. So through the first 10 books, he is working for John Thoresby, who is his nemesis, and also increasingly his a man who is very good to his children, who is a godfather to all of his children before he dies. And now the city has tried to keep him by offering him the job of captain of the bailiffs. I have created this job. There was not a captain of the bailiffs in York in the 14th century, but I thought, well, what could Owen do now? But he is also part of the household of which part of the household of the prince, the Black Prince. What that actually means is that he works for him in some capacity, and he is his eyes and ears in the north. So Owen has two hats right now, and he's actually quite powerful in a way.
Yeah. And so is Lucy. I mean, Lucy, is, we talked about that women didn't often, or maybe didn't have all that much in the way of rights or any kind of respect or so forth. But Lucy is an apothecary, which is a really important position too, especially when, there wasn't really any medical care system available. So she wound up having, so in combination, the two of them are a very powerful couple. She was a widow and had a child who, I think he died, didn't he, her son?
He died of pestilence.
Right. So she and Owen have children, but sadly her eldest son has died. So, across this, the 13th book, across all these books, you really get to know them. Why is it that, you were interested in this particular time in York? I mean, you could have written about York in any period. Why'd you pick the end of the 14th century?
Because my graduate work was on Chaucer.
There we go.
Chaucer, Piers Plowman, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, all of that. And so right. I just, this is my time. This is the time that I understand.
You're going to bring Geoffrey
more than this time.
Just Geoffrey, because didn't he when did he die? 1399, like Richard, or somewhere in there?
Yeah. Or 1400.
Right. So, but he's really going to come to prominence, not just as an author, but he had other roles to play. Is he going to come to New York? Did he actually ever go to York?
Well, we don't know whether he was actually ever in York, but in the
Ah,
series, he's been in York several times. In fact, in the most recently in I'm gonna go blank on the name of my own book. The one before A Choir of Crows, um, A Conspiracy of Wolves.
right. I know it's hard to, I can't remember titles at all anymore. It's a factor of old age, unfortunately.
I always go blank when somebody says, "What was the best book you read this year?" I go,
Right,
"Oh, they're all gone now."
I hear you.
But in A Conspiracy of Wolves, he is a prominent character,
Right.
and he drives. He was first seen in the series in The King's Bishop, or maybe it was The Nun's Tale. No, I'm not entirely sure. But he has some prominent roles in several of the books, and I was going to bring him back, a lot more, but I thought that gets a little ridiculous. So,
No, I don't know
but
that
he's
it
a great character. I just love
he
putting
is a
him in the
fascinating
real.
character. And, you know, I think, I mean, we know more of him because he was literate. I mean, because he actually wrote things at a time when most people, in fact, weren't literate. And so we know more about Chaucer than we might know about other people in the
Yes.
14th century. But no, I think you
But
should bring him back. I think he's absolutely fascinating.
he will come back. But he was, what was so interesting about him is that he was a civil servant. I mean, he
Yep.
he worked for several of the princes, and for the king, and by now or very soon he's going to be very prominent in the customs, and so he is, and he was caught behind enemy lines in France, and the king had to ransom him. So, Chaucer has a very interesting life. So yeah, he's an interesting character to play with. And Owen is such a straight man. And Geoffrey Chaucer, at least in my mind, is such a he loves to listen to gossip and eavesdrop and think about what people are like, and Owen at first finds him a bit of a fool, but very quickly realizes that he can be very useful to him. So,
Well, you know, Chaucer was writing before royalties, before publishing as we understand it. Now you couldn't really make a living as a writer. And so writers did hold job. I mean, Anthony Trollope, wasn't he in the Postal Service? It seems to me Trollope, who
oh, I
wrote like a
can't remember.
zillion books. I think he was in the Postal Service. I think Herman Melville was in the Customs Service
Mhm,
or something.
mhm.
Right. So, you know, it wouldn't be unusual that Chaucer would have all these jobs. I mean, you know, he didn't survive just on the Canterbury Tales, for heaven's sake.
Nope.
And he also married somebody. Didn't he marry
He married
Catherine
Catherine
Swynford's sister?
Swynford's sister. Yeah, Pippa.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
thought. So he was actually right there close to, because eventually John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, who basically fathered the Tudor dynasty, Catherine was his mistress, but eventually he was able to marry her and, in a rare thing, legitimize the children that he had with Catherine. So Geoffrey Chaucer was an in-law to this very powerful third son of King Edward the Third.
Yeah.
And that gave him, you know, all kinds of status. I mean, I've always thought he was a fascinating character. Somebody, I can't remember who, actually wrote a mystery series with Chaucer as the detective. Do you recall who that was?
I don't recall. I stayed away from it because I didn't want to know how they saw him.
Right.
Just,
Well, I
you
can't
know,
remember at the moment
I
who
wanted
that
to keep
was,
my
but
gift.
anyway, he's a nifty character. I like Owen a lot. I like Lucy a lot. Love medieval York, and I do think that Candace does great justice to all of these people. And it's nice to have Magda have a book where she has
Yeah.
such a powerful role. And I gather from something you said earlier that you've actually completed yet another book. Is that right?
I'm not completed, but I'm reaching the point where everything comes together in kind of an explosive scene. So it's an exciting time.
Ooh, that's great. So it'll be, oh, thank you, Patrick, who always helps me out when I can't remember stuff. Philip Gooden,
Oh,
Gooden or Gooden, wrote some books where Chaucer is a sleuth. I don't know if they're still in print, but you can always check because oftentimes books survive in a digital form if they don't survive in a print form. So there'll be a 14th Owen Archer, which is really exciting. Candace, are you ever going to do anything more with the characters in your other two series? I know one was deliberately a trilogy.
I have no idea. I really don't. I really enjoy the Owen Archers. I really enjoy the characters, and I love Kate Clifford and her gang and her Irish wolfhounds, who are set in York, but just at a later date,
Right.
at the very end of the 14th century, so that I can deal with Henry IV and Richard II and all of that. But
Maybe is the
yeah.
answer. Right.
I haven't decided yet what happens with her. So I put her on hold. I said, well, you decide what your fate is. And I'll go back to Owen Archer for a while.
I miss Owen. So I'm really happy that you
I
are
missed him too.
continuing to write about him. He's really a favorite. I haven't looked, and shame on me, but what's the status of the earlier books? Are they in print in some form at the moment?
Oh yeah. Yeah. They're when was it? 2015, Diversion Books reissued all 10 of the Owen Archers that existed at the time. And so they're all in print. And even the ones that had never, the weird history of the series and how the 9th and 10th book in the series, The Guilt of Innocence and A Vigil of Spies, hadn't been published in the United States. It was published in England and in Denmark and Italy, but not in the United States. So that's been great because they're in paperback and ebook. And then in the UK, they're actually beginning to bring out new covers of the early Owen Archer's Penguin Random House that are odd covers. They don't seem medieval to me, but the books are selling really. They have the first 4 out, and in ebook, it's Cornerstone that has it out in ebook, and they're doing really, really well. So
that's great news.
They've been number one, and
we can always import books from England. We do that on a fairly regular basis, but if Diversion Books has them. And Severn House is doing, are they doing your books in paperback as well as hardcover, Candace?
Yes,
they
don't
do
always paperback.
Great. Well, that's really good news. So let me call Patrick up and see what questions we might have or questions Patrick might have. There he is.
Well, I was just looking up. We actually have the Apothecary Rose, the Diversion edition,
Great.
and a couple of the Pegasus editions. And I just was looking up the covers on the rest of the Diversion books. So I'll make sure we get those in stock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they did a really great job of creating a series look with those.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I still remember reading the Apothecary Rose. Somehow first novels tend to stick in my mind, because it's like the first time you greet people, and it's exciting. But I remember how much I enjoyed reading it. As I say, I've read them all as they have published, but I tend to lose track sometimes of what status some of the earlier books actually have. So that's great to know, Patrick. Thank you.
And those early ones were St. Martin's, right?
Yes, they originally were St. Martin's.
Lady Chapel, and I remember those too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, you've kind of answered this question partially, but Lisa asks, did the inspiration for Magda come from a person in your life, or a medieval personage or an aspect of medieval culture?
Well, she's an interesting one, because when she first appeared in the book, I thought, where is this woman coming from? And in the Apothecary Rose, she is kind of the crone in a lot of, I was just very recently out of graduate school, and I had, steeped in medieval romance, and she was the crone, the healer, she was, at the beginning, she was more of an archetype than she was an actual person. But in rewrites, she became, this person to me. She's based on lots of digging around about women healers and my sense of what they would have needed to be like and how dedicated they would have needed to be. And she's also, there's a great deal of my friend Joyce, who the book is, to whom the book is dedicated, in her stature. And I didn't really realize it till a couple of years ago, how much Magda looks like Joyce.
In your
And I
mind,
don't think-
anyway. Yeah.
I don't think Magda or Joyce ever recognized that, but she really does.
I love that.
Here's a great question. I'm curious what 3 writers, living or dead, you would invite to a dinner party.
Oh my God.
Gotta have
That's a
Chaucer,
steal
right?
from the New York Times
Oh,
book review that every
that's-
week, every has
Yeah,
an author
yeah.
interview and always says
Oh.
that question.
Well, I would love to meet Christine de Pizan. So that's a medieval woman. And who I think that she and Virginia Woolf would have a lot to talk about. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to overhear. And Chaucer would absolutely enjoy listening to them. So I think the 3 of them. On another day, I would choose somebody else. All through high school, I wanted to meet Lord Byron.
I've always wanted to meet Eleanor of Aquitaine.
Oh, yes,
She
but
would
she
have been
wasn't a
right
writer.
up there at the top of my list. Although, you know, unfortunately, despite how it's dealt with in literature, Eleanor and I would never have been speaking the same language.
No.
You know, she was speaking medieval. I don't think it was even French. It was, I'm trying to think what she would have been speaking. Maybe she learned some English.
Yeah.
I mean, the Aquitaine
They're
had a
very-
different, it'll come to me, oh, it's the Languedoc. That's it. So she was brought up D''O''C. She was speaking Oc. And then, but she probably also, because people did that, learned French, English, probably spoke
Latin.
Italian. You know, they were very good at languages, those who really
Yes, they
studied better than we are. Anything else, Patrick?
No, I was just thinking that, you know, that who all was there at the Hellespont with Mary Shelley and
No, it was Lake Geneva.
was it?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was
not the
Byron,
Hellespont. The
Shelley,
Hellespont's in Greece.
Mary
um,
Wollstonecraft.
Mary
Shelley.
Wollston or Mary
Yeah.
Shelley,
And what is his name?
Percy Shelley, right?
Oh, the one who wrote the vampire story. What is his name?
Bram Stoker. No, it wouldn't have been Bram Stoker. He was later.
Polidori?
No,
Not
was it
Paul,
Bram
but-
Stoker? No.
No, it couldn't have been because I mean,
Oh.
he wrote that in 1890s or something.
Yeah. Was
Hmm.
Byron there too?
Byron was there.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
they were
yeah.
all, they
Byron,
were all,
Shelley, and the one who the one who wrote the vampire story. I can't remember his name. And I just read a modern version of that.
Yeah.
Oh, what was it? Well, anyway.
I thought I had my phone so I could actually look something up, but apparently I don't. Sorry about that.
That would have been a fun dinner party group to get
Yes.
together.
Oh, yes. but
Absolutely.
probably-
They had a wicked weather, if I remember it right. Weren't they all like reined in the castle out there on Lake Geneva? And
Oh, was it Horace Walpole?
Jean Witterson wrote Franken something. It's a recent book.
Frankenstein, is that what you're thinking about?
Well, it's Frankenstein, but it has a slightly different title.
Hmm.
And part of it is Mary Shelley in this damp, horrible, humid, just terrible climate. And she's so annoyed with all of them.
It was
all of
It
them.
was Polidori.
It was Polidori. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you.
no problem.
Excellent. Love it. Right.
Let's see. Anything else? Oh, Susan just says, who's the author Barbara mentions? Catherine somebody.
It's Anya Seton,
Anya Seton.
Anya, last name Seton, and the book is called Catherine. She wrote a number of historical novels, but Catherine, many of us who over the years have talked, Catherine was a really seminal book for people who like historical fiction.
Yeah.
And
When I
if
was in
you-
graduate school, everyone
Yeah.
in graduate studies and English literature had read Catherine. Everyone in my graduate.
It's really a brilliant book. And if you want to ever understand dynastic politics of medieval England and what happened that led to the War of the Roses and eventually the Tudors, you really have to read Catherine to work it all out. I myself think that John of Gaunt is one of the most fascinating characters in English history. So it's still in print. I looked it up because when I was writing up Candace's book, I wanted to make sure that Catherine was still available. And I think it's, I'm trying to remember whether it's University or the New York Review of Books or something like that. Anyway, it's still in print.
Oh,
So you can certainly order it from us or you can find it in a number of places, but do read it if you're interested in this era. So it's been a joy, Candace. Thank you very much
A
for
lot of
spending
fun.
an hour with us. And I love what you're wearing and thank
Oh,
you for
thank you.
resurrecting it because we were talking that Candace wore that, I think, the first time we met, which was
Yes.
in Seattle years and years ago. So she's brought it back to,
Yes,
yep.
I remembered.
You did. No, it's wonderful. So the magic of Zoom is that we'll be able to talk to her again when Owen Archer 14. What's the title? Do you have a working title?
Well, the working title is A Fox in the Fold. I have this animal thing going
Okay.
with the titles, and Magda just said something today that sort of solidified that as the title. So it probably is the title.
There we go. All right. So we'll be back with Owen Archer 14 in probably another year. Meantime, thank you for joining us. I will say that this is our historical fiction book of the month for October. And I think we are either sold out of our signed copies or very, very close to it. But if you would like to still order an autographed copy, I imagine we could send some more books to Candace. But don't wait too long because they tend to disappear. So do let us know if you'd like an autographed copy. Thank you very much, Candace. Thank you, Patrick, as always. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.